This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a renowned producer of motion pictures, television, and theater, as well as a hugely popular interviewer, educator, and author. Throughout an illustrious career spanning over 6 decades, our guest has been involved in virtually every aspect of show business. Back in the 60s, at the age of 22, he started out at the ABC television network in the station clearance department, and then joined the Walter Reade Organization, first as a film syndicator, and then in the theater division, becoming the vice president and head of film acquisition. He was then hired by Paramount Pictures, first as vice president of worldwide acquisition, and later as vice president of production. In 1978, at the age of 36, he established Castle Hill Productions, which became one of the largest independent film distribution companies in the world. His film producer credits include Widow's Peak, In the Spirit, No Nukes, and the 1992 restoration of Orson Welles' Othello. He's brought us a number of wonderful television specials, including The Lives of Lillian Hellman, Elia Kazan, A Director's Journey, Going Hollywood, The War Years, Going Hollywood, The 30s, Steve Allen's Golden Age of Comedy, and many more. And our guest has produced over 45 multi-award winning Broadway and off-Broadway plays, including Bullets Over Broadway, The Unexpected Man, Vita and Virginia, The Beauty Queen of Lenan, Tennessee Williams Remembered, Terms of Endearment, and many more. He also created and produced Witnesses to the 20th Century, a 14-hour documentary series examining the major historical events of the 20th century through the eyes of many prominent people who lived through it. Our guest also co-founded Gold Castle Records, which produced albums by legendary music artists Peter, Paul and Mary, Judy Collins, Joan Baez, Don McLean, and others. And if all of that weren't enough, our guest is also a preeminent and celebrated talk show host. Starting in 1974 and for 9 years, he hosted Movie Talk, a nationally syndicated radio program in which he interviewed hundreds of iconic stars like Bette Davis, Bob Hope, John Huston, Jane Fonda, Anthony Hopkins, Jack Nicholson, Dustin Hoffman, Warren Beatty, and dozens more. His show was also televised, and then he created a wonderful podcast called Julian Schlossberg's Movie Talk, which has recently become a YouTube channel. And now our guest has written 2 fascinating, compelling, and entertaining memoirs, Try Not to Hold It Against Me, A Producer's Life, and My First Book, Part 2, in which he shares a wealth of insights into the inner workings of show business, and he regales us with captivating stories about the dazzling array of superstars he's worked with and gotten to know. I am delighted to welcome the one and only Julian Schlossberg to our show. Julian, thank you so much for being here.
Harvey, thank you. I didn't realize I did all those things. I'm a little concerned now. I better lay down and rest.
Time for a nap, eh?
I think so.
Well, Julian, you fell in love with show business at a very early age. In fact, you were reading Variety at the age of 10, and your mother, like all Jewish mothers, wanted you to be a professional. So what did your parents think of your show business aspirations?
Well, my father loved the idea, but my mother was in charge of the house, and she didn't love the idea. So she said, I don't want you reading Variety. And so I didn't bring it home. I just read it on the outside. It was something, I just was struck. When you grow up, as I did with radio, your whole life is a different way because you don't see the image. You are, in your head, are imagining it. And whatever success I've had, part of that I really give to radio, which changed my life. I mean, I'm on the range with the Lone Ranger. I'm walking down these steps with Jack Benny to his vault. I mean, it's really a whole different way of growing up. And so when television first came on, it was also enlightening. My God, you didn't have to leave your home. Of course, when I go out and I lecture, Harvey, you'll get a kick out of this. Kids say, I tell them you had to get up to change the channel. There was no remote. You had to get up. There was no remote. Yeah. If even we had these little wires you turned, it was really a whole different way of growing up, and I very pleased that it was mine that way. I'm glad I had that opportunity.
I'm glad I did too. I want to ask you about your time at Paramount Pictures, which you described as the unhappiest you've ever been. Here's what you wrote about that time in your life, and I'm quoting you here. All the studios, despite producing movies, were a pure corporate structure where perpetuating your power and trying to expand it was the coin of the realm, no matter whom you had to hurt. I experienced more duplicity in those 2 years than in all the other years of my business life. I hated the system, the lying, the chicanery, and the fact that making movies was not the priority. So, Julian, my question to you is this. If you were running a movie studio today, what would you do differently?
Well, that's a good question, Harvey. The first thing I would have done was one of the first things would be to get a bunch of talented young people and give them the money to make a short, 10-minute, 15-minute short, to see if out of that whole group of young students from school, whatever, I could find a Scorsese, or we could find a Richard Lester, who, by the way, both of them started making shorts. They did not start in feature films. I mean, we both know the expression Rome wasn't built in a day. The idea of someone becoming a feature film director without having really directed enough, it's not a good idea. Just isn't. So that would be one thing. There would be no such thing. No one could be a vice president of my company, my new company that you gave me, without having worked on a movie. It was shocking to me how few executives that I encountered knew what it was to do a mix of a movie, to go in and mix the movie, to color correct a movie, to be in an editing room, to sit down and work with a writer to see what it is to change maybe a scene or two, to get involved in the casting, how important that is. There isn't a great director in the world who won't tell you 80% of making a movie is casting. It's what you do. And so, yes, I would be making sure that we would have young people coming up, and I would make sure that nobody got into a high position without having once worked from beginning to end on the making of a motion picture.
I think it's shocking that most senior movie studio executives have absolutely no knowledge or experience in the actual making of a movie. It really is shocking.
It is. And yet, I guess somebody who said, look, I'm a great lamp salesman, but I don't know how to make a lamp. So who knows? It's my feeling is, as I said, when you asked what I thought was a good question, I would want to make sure that they had the experience. Nobody could be a vice president without that.
Julian, I want to throw some names at you and ask you what comes to mind when you hear these names, starting with Elia Kazan.
What comes to mind is that he was the Spielberg or Lucas of his time. He was an incredible talent that directed some of the best movies, but also plays, and discovered some of the great actors. He won 2 Academy Awards for both On the Waterfront and A Gentleman's Agreement. And he was the original director of Death of a Salesman, of A Streetcar Named Desire. I mean, of All My Sons on Broadway. And of course, as you know, made a face in the crowd in Baby Doll in America, and East of Eden, and oh, so many movies. He was an extraordinary talent, and he did have, in history, a bad part of his life was the fact that he was a famous person who named names during the horrible McCarthy period in my country.
I love what you said in your book. You said that spending time with him was like taking a powerful drug without ever having to come down.
Yes, it was unbelievable. I never saw such energy in anyone, any human being. He was a firecracker. His mind was so fertile, and he would just keep we would walk on the street and he'd show me a restaurant he liked. He'd look at a person, he'd say, look at that person. What does he remind you of? It was an incredible thing to just be with him. And I was lucky enough to do about 3 or 4 interviews with him. And then with Richard Schickel, the Time magazine film critic, we together made Elia Kazan, A Director's Journey. So it's a film that I'm very proud of, that I produced and that Richard directed. So it was a lot about him, of course.
How about Woody Allen? You produced 3 of his plays. What did you think of him?
I think he's terrific. In fact, on my show last week, no, 2 weeks ago, he sat down for an hour, over an hour, and talked to me about his life. It's one of the interviews that I'm the most proud of. And as you mentioned earlier, whether it was Betty Davis or George Burns or Bob Hope, I had the biggest names. But the work with Woody that I recently did, where we go back in time, I grew up in the Bronx, he grew up in Brooklyn. But I don't know where you grew up, Harvey. I know you're in Canada now, but we could walk a half a block to a block and everything was there. The delicatessen, the tailor shop, the little candy store, anything that you wanted was in walking distance. 12 movie theaters, 12 I could walk to. And of course, he talked about that too. What didn't come up, and it'll come up now on your show, I'm glad to say, there was a famous theater in Brooklyn called the Midwood, very famous. His grandfather owned it, but I didn't bring it up. I don't know why. So I'm going to try one more interview with him, and not to just bring that up. How much, man done over 50 movies. You can't cover that all in an hour.
No, that's amazing. I can assure you, I didn't grow up in a town that had anywhere near that kind of excitement, anywhere near the proximity of my home. I want to next ask you about Marlo Thomas, because you said that she and Phil Donahue were like family to you. Tell me about your friendship with them.
Well, I met Marlo again on my radio show over 50 years ago. In fact, it is 50 years ago, 1974. She was one of my first guests. She was on Broadway doing a play called Thieves by the man she was living with at that point, the wonderful writer Herb Gardner. And we went, after the show, I invited her for dinner, and we went out and we struck up a friendship that has lasted 50 years. I think of her as an extraordinary, another person with unbelievable energy. When you meet people with a life force, when it doesn't matter their age, if they have that life force, you get involved with it. And it's like an undertow. You're just brought into it. And she has it. I mean, the work she's done for St. Jude's just alone is enough to get her a pass to heaven. So she's intelligent, she's fun, she's got an incredible sense of humor. And she and Phil threw the wedding for my wife and myself at their beautiful home, and ended up hiring the Peter Duchin Orchestra. I mean, it was quite an event. And my wife is from England, and when we got there, there was a big flagpole, and Phil Donahue had gone out and bought the Union Jack and the Stars and Stripes, and was flying both of them as you came in the door. So it was quite an event. They've been wonderful friends. Phil sadly passed away recently, but what he did for American daytime television can never be duplicated. He started it all. Even Oprah Winfrey said, I stood on Phil Donahue's shoulders. No, they were wonderful friends. She still is, of course, and I'll miss him greatly. It's hard to see, but there's a picture of him right there in my office in the blue sweater.
Well, you're so fortunate to have them as friends. Phil Donahue was an absolute legend, and one of the reasons why I wanted to be an interviewer. And what about Jackie Mason? You were his manager for a while, weren't you?
I was, in fact. This is, it's I almost feel like I'm Uncle Remus telling these stories, Harvey. and you're kind enough to lob them right in. Let's see. Jackie Mason had an up and down career. He was really flying high, and then he got into a whole hoopla with Ed Sullivan, who was the #1 variety show in America. He was running long, Jackie, and Sullivan gave him the 2-minute sign. And Jackie went like that, not saying up yours, but saying, I don't want to end yet. I got to let me finish. And Sullivan decided he had been disrespectful and barred him, and all of a sudden his career was over for a while. Anyhow, he went to Miami. He could play Miami. He could play the Catskill Mountains. He could play where there were enough Jewish people, even though some Jewish people did not like him at all. But he was very funny, wrote his own material. Very rare. Most comics do not write their own material. He wrote everything himself. Very funny, very smart, wonderful singing voice. His family were cantors and rabbis. They have the whole background. And he came to me with a movie he had made. I was running the Walter Reade theaters as far as booking the show, the films all over the country. And he came to me with a movie called The Stoolie. And he couldn't get anyone to distribute it. He couldn't get anyone to open it. And I looked at it rather tentatively because I figured if no one's willing to open it, it must not be very good. And if I can go to a sidebar for a moment, Harvey, there are hundreds of movies every year made that never see the light of day. But anyhow, so I thought this was probably going to be one of them, but I was pleasantly surprised. It was a good movie, not a great movie, but a good one. And while my theaters were booked, I knew the other theater owners, and I called a good friend of mine named Meyer Ackerman, who owned the 68th Street Playhouse, and we put The Stoolie in there. Well, at that point, Jackie decided I should be his manager. I said, Jackie, the fact that I could take care of where I work, being an exhibitor, I know the people, it doesn't mean I can book you in nightclubs. He said, you can't do worse. You can't do worse than what's happening now. He said, give it a try. I said, well, I have to go to management. I have to go to the Walter Reade president, and I got to ask them if it's okay. They'll say yes. Don't worry. They'll say yes. And they did. And so I didn't know what to do, Harvey, but I bumped into an old girlfriend in New York City on the street, just coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, depending on your beliefs. But anyhow, I bumped into her, and she was married to the deputy mayor of New York City under John Lindsay. His name was Sid Davidoff, and he and Richard Aurelio had taken over Toots Shor's nightclub and made it into the Toots Shor's restaurant and made it into a nightclub called Jimmy's. And they were going to open soon. And she said, would you like to come to the opening? I said, oh, sure. I said, but I would like to see if your folks want to book Jackie Mason, because I'm managing him now. She said, oh, I think they will. And they did. And it was a huge success. He came back at Jimmy's, and all of a sudden I was getting calls to book him. And I was excited because in the mountains, there was a very fine hotel called the Pines, very well known. And I booked him for the weekend and called him up and said, Jackie, I've got great news. We're going to be in the Pines in the mountains, in the Catskills. He said, what about Grossingers? I said, well, Grossingers didn't want you, but the Pines want you. How about the Concord? I said, Jackie, you told me to book you anywhere. I've got this booking. He said, no, I don't want to play. I said, well, and if you don't want to play, I quit. He says, you quit? You're getting 20%. How can you quit? I said, I don't care if I'm getting 50%. All I have is my reputation. I don't have anything else. I don't have a doctor's degree. I don't have a law degree like Harvey does. I don't have a dental degree. I just have my reputation. I'm gone. And so I quit. And that was my story with Jackie. However, I will say this. He never held it against me. And you mentioned Marlo and Phil. I took both of them to see him in Broadway when he made a gigantic comeback. And they walked in. First person in was Mayor Koch. Oh, the mayor is here. And then Phil, oh, my God, Phil Donahue. And then Marlo walked in. Oh, and then he said, oh, my God, this is the guy who changed my life and blah, blah, blah. So it was very nice. We went backstage, and it ended up that we were not in any, he didn't hold it against me. As the title of the book is, Try Not to Hold It Against Me. He didn't.
Well, that's a good thing. And I think you probably did the right thing to move on. Another person that you kind of moved on from was Bea Arthur. You turned down the chance to produce her one woman show, right?
Yes, I did. I was so excited because I had seen Bea Arthur with Angela Lansbury in Mame. This was before she became Maud. It was Mame, but she wasn't Mame. She was Mame's close friend. They do a song called Bosom Buddies. And if the folks haven't seen it, just go on YouTube and Google it. One of the great numbers on Broadway. After that, she did Mame, of course. I mean, Maud, of course. And I got a call from her that she was coming to New York and would I be interested in producing her play? I said, "Oh my God, yeah." I said, "Would you send me a copy?" She said, "No, no, let me perform it for you." I said, "Great, that would be terrific." So she came to New York. I went to the studio. She performed it for me, and I had notes. And I went up. I said, "B, this is terrific. I think this could be a huge hit. I'd love to be involved. I'd love to produce it, and I'd like to give you some notes." She says, "I don't want any notes." I said, "You don't want to hear what I have to say?" She said, "No, I don't." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. I wish you the best of luck, but I've worked with the biggest names in show business who are interested in my notes. They may not take them, but they'll want to hear what they are. The fact that you won't do that, I have to leave." And I left. So that was my story. Now, it did open up and it was a reasonable success because she was a very big name. But the New York Times wrote, and I never forgot it, "This is a show in need of an author." and that
Wow.
and that had been my point, that it was a lovely show, but it didn't have any depth. And I guess that's just the way she wanted to present it, and she did.
It's
So
disappointing to know that she wasn't interested in at least hearing your input. Because I have to tell you, I saw the show. I'll never forget. It started with the recipe for leg of lamb, I think.
yes,
And
right.
then, but she didn't talk at all about Golden Girls and very, very little about Maud. That's what people wanted to hear about. And I have to be honest with you, I love her, but I felt disappointed.
Well, I have to say ditto. I felt the same way. But that's what happens. I mean, the reason I wanted to write the book was to not say, "Look how great everything is," because in nothing, I don't care what the business is, it's not all great. And it wasn't woe is me. I didn't get depressed over it. I was disappointed because I really wanted to present her on Broadway. But I have an expression, nothing worse. If there's nothing worse than that, I'll sign the deal. And that was that.
Well, I really respect that you're a man of principles. You stood up. So far, we've heard once with Jackie Mason, now with Bea Arthur. Now, the one person who really figures more prominently in your books than anyone else is Elaine May. You produced all of her plays for over 30 years. You have a very, very strong and fruitful relationship with Elaine May. What do you think accounts for that chemistry between the two of you?
Well, one of the things is we're both only children. That's an interesting thing. So we don't have any brothers and sisters, and I think we became that. That's just what happened. That was a big beginning. I also make her laugh. She clearly makes me laugh, but the fact that I can make her laugh, I think is a big help too. And Elaine has credited me with the best note she ever got from anyone on anything. And I'll tell you the story quickly, or try to make it quick. We were in Seattle, out of town, with a play that she had written and was co-starring with Alan Arkin in. She had written two of the plays. They were one acts, and Alan had written one. Alan had directed the play. And about 8 or 9 days before we were going to open, Alan turned to me and said, "Julian, you're now the director." He said, "I don't know my blocking. I'm learning my lines. I can't do anymore. So you take over the directing now," which was, pretty daunting to hear. I had directed, but I didn't really want to start directing two of the greatest comic actors that ever walked the stage. But okay, it was either me or no one, so that was the choice. I chose myself too. And one night at the end of a preview, Elaine said, "Do you have any notes about this particular play?" I said, "Babe, they're dozing off." And she fell over laughing, and the next day came in and just cut. She did some great trimming and cutting, but she thought that was her best note that she ever got. They're dozing off. So I guess I could say that she can't stand to be interviewed. She is the Greta Garbo of her time, I believe. And the fact that I got her to come to the 92nd Street Y, and the fact that she came to Sardi's to launch both my books. And I also was the guest host on Turner Classic Movies, TCM, and that's also online. And I'm proud of that interview that I've done with her. The fact that I've interviewed Elaine and Woody and Neil Simon and Larry Gelbart, and I guess the only one I'm missing is Mel Brooks.
Oh, yeah, that would be amazing. You know, your interviews are really part of the historical record. They're not just entertainment, they are important foundational pieces of history. And I love that you do that. And I'm also really impressed with her, you know, that first of all, you had the guts to give her feedback that was very concise, but also very direct. They're dozing off, and she took it and she trusted you and she made the product better.
She did make the product better. By the time we got to New York, we were a giant hit. And the New Yorker, I remember this quote. She said, Nancy Franklin was the critic, and she said, "It's worth 50 times the price of a ticket to see Alan Arkin and Elaine May on stage." It was an incredible thing. They hadn't done theater in over 30 years as performers. So the idea that I was able to get them back is something I'm quite proud of. And there's a scene at the beginning of the third act where it's just them, just the two of them. And some nights, because I lived 4 or 5 blocks from the theater, some nights I would just go, not the first act, not the second act. I knew what time the third act was, just to see the two of them perform the first 10 minutes alone. And they never, ever did the same show twice. In other words, they had written it and they were acting in it, they were able to do this incredible ability to improv, which, of course, both of them were brilliant at.
And what a review they got. It doesn't get better than that. Now, Julian, there's a chapter in your first book about a birthday party in New York hosted by Barbara Streisand and Liza Minnelli. And I got the distinct impression that although you know a lot of big stars, you do not enjoy partying with them. Am I right?
That is correct. I don't like going to the parties particularly, unless, of course, they're real close friends. And then of course, it's very, very comfortable. Marlo and Phil, for many, many years, hosted every year Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, July 4th, and occasional Easter. So that was every year. That was the hub for a group of us. And it does sound like name dropping. I don't mean it to be, but I'll say that the people that were there every year, I would say to my mother, looks, once again, I was the only person there I never heard of, you know. But it was Gloria Steinem. I mean, it was just an incredible group of very funny and intelligent people. And I was just as happy as I could be sitting around and being in that company. So yeah, I think, Harvey, it's been, as I wrote in the book, I've been very blessed, and I feel very, very happy about the fact that the thing I loved the most was that show business. I wanted to be in the entertainment business. I had no idea if I could do it. I tried acting, and I couldn't take the rejection. I just couldn't take it. I remember thinking, hey, I'm an only child. You know who I am? And they'd say, yeah, next, next. We know who we are. Goodbye. And the rejection was tough. One of the things I always ask actors when I'm interviewing them is how they handled rejection. Because, the time a person becomes a star, they have been really hurt a lot. People don't realize they've been lied to, they've been rejected, they've been had callbacks 3 or 4 times, and then they don't get the role. So they're somewhat damaged goods. And it doesn't in any way excuse some terrible behavior at times. But I think, as we say in America's traffic court, guilty with an explanation.
That's a good way to put it. These are people who are incredibly resilient. If I've learned anything from the legendary people we've had on our show, it's that. And you, my dear Julian, have met so many legendary stars. Have you ever been really starstruck by anybody?
Well, certainly George Burns and Bob Hope. I mean, that I couldn't believe that they were sitting across from me. Rex Harrison. Oh my God. Rex Harrison came, said, I'll do your show. This is, he didn't say it through his press people. He'll do your show if you let him see the questions ahead of time. Well, no one had ever asked that, and no one has ever asked it since. But I dutifully typed up a bunch of questions. He came in before the show began. I gave him the questions. He looked them over, and we started the interview. After the first of, I don't know, 8, 10 minutes, we went to a commercial, and he looked at me. He took the sheet, he ripped it up, threw it on the floor, and we had the greatest conversation. So that was a real, I was so excited. As a kid, I had seen My Fair Lady not once, but twice. I mean, I couldn't believe that Henry Higgins himself is sitting there. Forget Dr. Dolittle. Henry Higgins was there. And boy, that was, yes, I was starstruck with that.
You must have been starstruck when you met Cary Grant.
Oh my God. I was worse than that. I was Ralph Cramden on The Honeymooners. It was, I couldn't even talk because I didn't know he was there. It was an Academy Award party hosted by the most famous agent known as Swifty Lazar, who handled presidents and kings and movie stars. And he sat me at a table of 8 people. To my right was Ginger Rogers, and to my left was Mia Farrow. Across from me was Yul Brynner. Yul Brynner was looking at me like, how dare I even be seated at his table? He looked at me with, I don't know what's beyond hostility, but whatever it was, huge disdain. No question. Not that I had said anything, but he just didn't want me at that table. And I guess especially surrounded by Mia and Ginger Rogers. Anyhow, I'm talking to Ginger Rogers, and then Mia Farrow and I start speaking, and I get a tap on the shoulder, and Ginger Rogers wants to talk to me. So I turn around, and she says, I want you to meet, and down comes Cary Grant's head. Now, if I knew Cary Grant had been there, it would be one thing. If I had seen him coming towards the table, it would be another. But you turn around, and there's that face that you can't believe. So yes, I really, that, thank you for reminding me how I really was starstruck. That was serious starstruck. Yes, that did happen. And he couldn't have been more charming and more gorgeous to look at. And yes, that was quite an evening.
Well, I would imagine that when Yul Brynner saw that you were being introduced to Cary Grant by Ginger Rogers, he must have changed his impression of you.
Yeah, he may have gone from total disdain to just dislike. I think
Now,
that's
Julian, you worked with Gloria Steinem on a 1993 documentary called Sex and Justice about the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas hearings. And despite great reviews, no one would broadcast it in America. What do you make of that?
I think it was too controversial, and it was. She tried. Gloria said, "Look, I'm pro Anita Hill." I said, "Well, yes, but let's see if we can make a documentary that shows if we can both sides." And I think we did, but I think that it was such a hot potato that I don't think anybody would broadcast it, and they didn't. But we played it all over the world. We played in Germany and France and Italy. We played it, but not in America, and it saddened me. It still does, but that's what happens. You know, I said earlier, Harvey, into everybody's life. A little rain must fall. Sometimes you get a thunderstorm, sometimes a drizzle, but you do get rained on a bit. And that's an example of working on something for, oh, probably a good year that never saw the light of day in the country I made it for. I didn't make it for Europe. I made it for America, as did Gloria. But yeah, that happens. You win some, you lose some. And am I proud of it? Absolutely. Will it play one day? I hope so. I hope.
Well, it's a sad commentary on the state of broadcasting, both then and even now, and it's still extremely relevant, in my opinion. Now, Julian, you attended the Cannes Film Festival for over 25 years. Most industry people I've spoken to hate it. What do you think of it?
I loved it. I couldn't understand why they hated it. I'm in the south of France. I'm on the Mediterranean. I'm seeing movies day and night, whatever I want. I'm eating the best food ever made in the south of France. I've got to know Roger Verger, who runs Moulin et Mougin. I've got to the incredible restaurants at the Hotel du Cap at the Eden Rock. No, I loved it every time. I couldn't wait to go. And I went for 25 years. When I first went, Harvey, believe it or not, I was the only, or maybe one or two others, American person there. They hadn't gone to Cannes at that point. They were showing mostly, quote, foreign movies, and I was happy to be a buyer of foreign movies. So it was great. I had the pickings. Everybody was coming after me. I was the everybody wanted to meet me only because I was one of the few Americans there. Eventually, I got to the back of the line. Everybody was going then. And so I was not where I was at that point at the beginning.
Well, you were ahead of your time. In 1981, you produced your first Broadway show called It Had to Be You, starring Renee Taylor and Joe Bologna. You had absolutely no experience in the theater. So, how did you learn what to do?
Slowly, I guess. What had happened was they both separately had been on my show, so we got to know each other, and that's what happened in those days. I don't think it happens as much now, but you could get to know a lot of the people you interviewed if they were interested in you, and I was clearly interested in them most of the time. Not all the time. Sometimes you had some turkeys, but with Renee and Joe, they had written a play. They wanted me to hear it, and they invited me to their home to do so. My mother was visiting. I said, "Can I bring my mother?" And Joe said, "Can I bring my mother?" And I laughed. He said, "No, I'm not kidding. Is that okay?" I said, "Sure." So there'll be four of us. No, three of us, two mothers and me. And so they read the play to me, and I loved it. I thought it was terrific. And what was more important was a Jewish mother and an Italian mother loved it. I thought, well, if I got the Jews and the Italians, I've got a show. And but I didn't know how to raise the money, and I explained to them, and I've never produced. And Renee said, "So you'll learn with us." Okay, I said, "I'll try." And I was consulting for an interesting man, a fellow named Alan Klein. He had been the manager of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and I was his consultant. And I told him about the play, and I asked him if he'd come, and they'll read it at my home. And he came, and at the end of it, he said, "Let's go into your bedroom." We went into the bedroom, and he said, "Have you ever produced a play?" I said, "No." I said, "Have you?" He said, "No." He said, "Look, it's funny. Well, come on, we'll learn together." And he put up the money. He put up all the money, financed the entire play. And we played for 4 months. We got mixed reviews. But, here's the irony of the business, Harvey. And I now know, because you've been doing this for years now, interview, and you hear these stories. But the man who was the most powerful man in New York was the New York Times critic. His name was Clive Barnes. He had been the ballet critic, and then they brought him over to do the theater. And he gave us a rave. So you would think this is great news. No. 2 weeks before, he had been let go by the Times, been hired by the New York Post. So the New York Post, he gave a great review, but the New York Times, Frank Rich, did not. And That was the irony of the business. If we had opened a couple of weeks earlier, we'd still be playing, I think.
Well, how important do you think the critics are to the success of a show?
They're not as important as they were in 1981. They're not important at all for musicals, at all. They don't, it doesn't matter. So many great musicals successes, Wicked, Mamma Mia, got bad reviews. They don't, public doesn't care. They generally don't care about comedy. The only import they have now is for drama. And sadly, there's almost no drama. Herb Gardner won the Tony for I'm Not Rappaport, and he had gotten terrible review from the New York Times. And when he won the Tony, he walked up in front of the television audience, held it up, and said, "There is life after Frank Rich." Great quote. Great
That
quote.
says it all. Well, there's another quote: producers should never invest their own money. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. If you're investing your heart and your soul, you better keep your money away. But I didn't know how to do that at the beginning. So I went out and I said, I'm putting up my money. That's how much I believe in this. And that made it much easier to raise money. I would say you mentioned my unhappy years at Paramount. The other unhappiness of my life vocationally is raising money. I don't dislike it. I hate it. I can't stand it. I call it the tin cup theory. I have to go around with my tin cup raising money, and I really dislike it. There are men and women who like it, and I wish I could partner with them because I don't like doing it at all. Bullets Over Broadway was not the success I hoped it would be, despite the fact that Woody wrote it and Susan Stroman directed it and choreographed it. It was not, but I would say this. That would have been a musical. If I needed the money, I would have put my money into. I so believed in it. It was the only time I thought I was going to hit the golden ring. And I've had successes, and I don't mean to, I'm not crying, but I never had the gold ring. I wanted that more than anything producing. And while I'm proud of many of the shows I've done, and many of them have had success, many of them have not, but I never hit that gold ring that I mentioned. Wicked, my friend David Stone did, who had been my general manager, but now he's one of the most successful producers in something like Wicked. I wanted Bullets to be, as the head of the biggest advertising agency in theater said during a preview, Julian, you have the guys and dolls of today. You've got the guys and dolls. You're in. I was sure I was in. I couldn't have been more wrong.
Well, let's be frank. On opening day, Mia Farrow's allegations of child molestation against Woody Allen were published on that very day. And I personally, for whatever it's worth, I think that hurt the show.
It certainly didn't help it. No one was going to say, I think I want to see it now. So yeah, that was one of the things. But the Times gave it at best a mixed review, and then it turned out that Ben Brantley was a friend of Mia Farrow. So, it was so much nefarious things going on behind the scenes. But the musical itself, I'm very proud of. And that musical was played all over the world. And despite the fact that we were not successful on Broadway, we were in many countries, including Japan, of all places. We were very successful. So, as I said before, win some, lose some.
Well, you like to say you can't make a living as a producer in the theater, but you can make a killing. So I guess you're telling us you never really made a killing. You never had that big blockbuster juggernaut.
Absolutely not. And it doesn't look like I'm going to get it. On the other hand, I've had a lot of fun and a lot of enjoyment. So, I mean, I'm not, in no way am I complaining, but I am really impressed, Harvey, with your absolute ability to interview and the fact that you do the research. I've been interviewed by a lot of people now over the years. There are very few people who do what you do. Take the time, read the book, see the movie, go to the play, whatever it might be. And I think you should be proud of the fact that you do that, because people come on, they don't get paid. So the least one can do is the research, and you clearly do it. So I thank you for that, not for just me, but some of the interviews I've watched that you've done. So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
That means the world to me, Julian. I can't thank you enough for saying that, especially coming from you. You're an interviewer that I look up to so much. Now, just on the topic of producing and not making a killing, I think one of the reasons is because the riskiest kind of play to produce is a comedy, because there's so much risk in miscasting. When you read the script of a play, how do you decide whether you want to produce it?
I have to fall in love. I have to not like it. I have to love it. I have to say, I have to put this on. I remember Arthur Penn, the wonderful, great director, gave me a play by Turgenev, a Russian writer who wrote this play, and it had never been produced in America. And I read it, and I thought it was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. Now, Arthur and I had a relationship. He would send me stuff I turned down. I would send him a lot of stuff he turned down. But finally, we found this play. And Alan Bates was going to come and do it. And I sent it to Frank Langella, who was performing in London with Joan Collins in Moon Over Buffalo. So he wasn't the happiest of fellows at that point. And I sent him the play, and he called me. He said, I want to meet the man who will produce this play on Broadway. He said, I can't believe you're willing to do it. I said, do you want to do it? That's the question. I'm willing. Will you do it? And he said, oh, I'll do it. And the great thing about it, Harvey, and that this is something I'm proud of, both Alan Bates and Frank Langella won the Tony for that play called Fortune's Fool. And it's a play that I'm very proud to have produced. So, Frank Gilroy wrote The Subject Was Roses and won the Pulitzer for that, and wrote other things too, a lot of other movies and plays. And he said a funny thing to me one day. He said, on your tombstone, it's going to say, quality was his undoing.
That is quite the quote. But, you talk about your proudest achievements. The first time I ever heard your name was in 1992. You were responsible for restoring and re-releasing Orson Welles' Othello. And I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but to me, that would be one of my proudest achievements if I was you.
Yes, and it is. And you're not me, but it still is. No, thank you. Orson Welles was a great, great filmmaker, and the idea that I could get involved with a film that had languished for 40 years, never been shown anywhere, was incredible to me. And along with other people, we took that movie, which had been recorded often after World War II in Italy. So the sound was awful. It was out of sync. It was in terrible shape. A couple of fellows in Chicago were able to get the music scored, that's note for note, but with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And then I was able to do the mix. And when you do a mix, simply, there's dialogue in a movie, there's the photograph, of course, the picture, the dialogue, the music, and of course, sound effects. And so you take all those elements and marry them together into one track. And that's what we tried to do by getting this material put back into sync. And we did. And we went to Cannes to show it again. And it was another highlight, as you said, of doing that, bringing it back to the world, playing at the Palais. And after that, the party, a woman came over to me, tapped me on the shoulder and said, hello, I'm Emma Thompson. I just wanted to come. I don't want to stay at the party. I wanted to thank you for what you did. Oh, well, that was that was enough for me for a couple of nights. The fact that someone took the trouble to come to the party, not to stay at the party, just to meet me, to thank me. So yes, I would say I like the fact that you bring up my life.
Well, it's been quite a life. I mean, the achievements. And of course, I have to ask you about Julian Schlossberg, the interviewer, because I am an interview junkie. You've interviewed some of the greatest legendary stars in the history of show business. How did you learn your interviewing skills?
I don't think it was anything about learning. It was really about interest. When I listen to you and I talking to you, I know you're interested in what I have to say. How many times have we seen people looking down at their notes as the interviewer? They're not they the next question, next question. It I think the fact is that I love show business. I loved it since I was a child. When people come on, I'm crazy about them, or else I wouldn't have them on the show. I really care about them, and I know about them. I grew up with them, or I worship them, if you will. So I think part of that makes you a better interviewer, that you really care. Secondly, I have a huge advantage over most interviewers. I know the business. I'm in the business. I know the problems that most people don't know. I can talk about, as we just did, a mix where most people couldn't talk about a mix. So that kind of thing helps you a great deal. And the other person knows that you know their field. Big, big help. And on top of it, I never have any notes, no notes. So that what I'm trying to do is a conversation, not an interview, the way we're doing now, which makes you a good interviewer because we're having a conversation. We're not being said, the next one, when did you have your first ingrown toenail? It's a whole different world.
Well, it's a real treat to get to interview an interviewer, that's for sure. Now, you've been friends with Barbara Streisand for many years, but you've never interviewed her. Why?
She doesn't like to do them, and I don't have a big enough audience for someone as big as that. But she's terrific. I'm a great fan of hers, and when she had her home in New York, we lived a few blocks away from each other, so we spent a lot of time together at in her place, my place, and when she met James Brolin, she and Jimmy and my wife and I, we spent a lot of time together at the beginning of her relationship. So she's done. I think she's done some wonderful interviews lately because of her new book, but I haven't contacted her for it because I know that she doesn't like to do them. So maybe I will now that you brought it up. I've just written it down.
I would love you to do it. I really thought Howard Stern did a great job with her of all the interviews she's done since her book came out, but I've watched you many times and I think you would give a completely different flavor, a different texture to the interview because you do know her so well. It makes a huge difference if you know the guest.
It does make a big difference, and I was very surprised about how good Howard Stern is, though. When I first saw him, I just thought he was, kind of a sleazy guy, just doing but he's become a real top interviewer, and I'm impressed with him. I never met him, never spoken to him, but he does a good job. Yeah, I really, maybe I'll try to contact Barbara. I don't know. We'll see. If I do, I swear to you, I'll call you. I've got your number.
I would love that. Well, please give her my love. Now, Julian, of all the interviews you've ever done, I think the most impressive is the series of interviews you did for your 14-hour documentary series called Witnesses to the 20th Century. You interviewed so many iconic individuals like Elie Wiesel, Gloria Steinem, Arthur Miller, Henry Kissinger, Jesse Jackson, President Bush Sr., Buzz Aldrin. Those are just the ones that come to mind. What inspired you to undertake such a project?
Well, I was watching Ken Burns's Civil War, and I thought, wow, this is a wonderful documentary. But it's actors reading letters. I don't. I think I should try to get some of the people who made the 20th century. We were going into the 21st, so you can see I started it right after my bar mitzvah. Anyhow, I thought, let me see if I can get, and I made a list of people I would like to get. And one of the highlights for me was the great ball player Willie Mays, because I was told by my camera crew in San Francisco, where I went to interview Mr. Mays, that he's monosyllabic. He's not going to talk much. Don't expect much. You've done great with Joan Baez and Clint Eastwood and George Schultz and all the people I had interviewed in San Francisco, but you're not going to do it with him. I said, okay. So into the room comes Willie Mays, and I don't just say this, I yell this. Oh my God, it's the Say Hey Kid. And this old man comes in and has to say, hey, kid. And he just gave me a 24-karat smile, sat down, and he talked. He talked. And while he's talking, I'm getting pats on the back by the sound man, the cameraman. They're patting me in the back because they've never seen this with Willie Mays. So that was a real, when you ask about a highlight, that was a real highlight. Obviously, many of the people that you interview have their stories. They've got it down pat. And so what I try to do is to get some of those stories. They're interesting, but I try to get something that perhaps no one's ever asked them. And so often they said, no one's ever asked me that question. And that's, to me, a real highlight as an interviewer, because that's the kind of thing I want to do. And the other thing that's important to me, Harvey, interviewing, is to find out where it came from. Where did it come from? What was the genesis? How did you become who you became? And the most interesting aspect to tell you is that not one person, not one said, I had a plan. Not one of them. They all came about what happened to them through circumstances. And I was fascinated by that, because the men and women I grew up with as an executive, many of them had a plan. I had a plan too. I mean, my plan was to run a studio, but the best laid plans don't necessarily happen. So I wanted to have a record, not through letters, of how these people were affected by the 20th century and how they affected the 20th century. So we go back as far as I found a World War I veteran, unbelievable. And we go back to Robert McNamara, who had been Secretary of Defense, remembering the armistice of World War I. So we go back as early as I could, and we go right through the Depression and, of course, the World War II and Vietnam and all the major events and how these people were affected by it, but also affected it. And that's a real love of mine. I've been working on it, as I say, a long time. And it's a 14-hour show, and I'm having difficulty selling it. But I hope one day to sell it. I'm happy to say that the Library of Congress wants it, so I know it'll be there as a record. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Well, I certainly hope that this documentary, all 14 hours of it, becomes publicly available. Again, it's part of the historical record. I think you're the perfect person to do those interviews, because you don't just have a natural curiosity about what makes these people tick. I think you really understand people. And I'm going to tell you, I think it's because, and I tell you this because it's clear from both of your books, you've dealt with every kind of personality throughout your career, Julian, from egomaniacs to con artists to great artists to everything in between. And your mother once gave you an important piece of advice. She said, don't judge people by what you would do yourself. So let me ask you then, how do you assess people's behavior?
Well, I mean, what I try to do is to see what their insecurities are. All of us have them. I don't care who you are. I don't care how big you are. You've got them. And so the idea is to see if I can be perhaps helpful if I'm working with them. But as an interviewer, again, I have no notes. I'm just sitting across from them. And in Witnesses to the 20th Century, obviously almost everybody was old, because I wanted to have the whole span of the century. I wasn't interviewing Miley Cyrus or Ariana Grande. I was interviewing older people. And so I made sure that I was almost knee to knee with them with my chair and theirs. And the brain, as you know, is a muscle. It responds to stimuli. And I'm talking, looking in their eyes, talking back and forth, and they forget they're on camera. I know there's lights and I know there's a camera, two cameras in this case, but they forgot they were on because we were just talking. And that to me was the way to get the best interview.
I've heard you say that the world is divided between nurses and patients. You even said that Mia Farrow is the ultimate patient. Why?
Well, she made you understand that there was a need that she had, and up until now, she hadn't found the right man to help, but you were it. When she turned those headlights on you, you knew that she had this incredible power to seduce, not sexually, but seduce to say, you're the guy. Up until now, haven't found him, but you're it. It's an incredible ability. And I felt the undertow, and I had she was hanging out, having her home on Martha's Vineyard, and I was a part owner of the four theaters. And I swear to you, I ended up giving her passes to the theater. But if I had spent another night with her, I probably would have given her half my ownership because she just had this incredible ability. And because it was hard. I wasn't sure how come Sinatra, Frank Sinatra, Andre Previn, all these incredible, Woody Allen, all these incredible men had been caught up in this person. And I understood right after that how it could happen.
Do you think it's possible to be a part-time nurse or a part-time patient?
I hope if the best thing you can be is that. I think if you can be both that, then you've kind of hit the jackpot because you can be helped, but you also can help. And I think that's what makes a great relationship in any kind, whether it's a romantic one or a friendship, where you're there for the person, but they're also there for you. So, yes, I think not only is it possible, it's the goal. It's what should be the goal.
You wrote in your second book that there are three words that you believe should be everybody's philosophy of life. Let it go. Why are those words so important?
Well, because all of us are caught up, understandably, in our ego. I can't believe she did that. I can't believe he would do that to me. I can't. Well, yeah, it's true. But if you sit down most of the time and analyze why you're upset, it's about your ego, and the idea, do you want to give up your power to this particular incident? And the answer is let it go. Just let it go. And it's not easy. It's not easy. And I certainly try to practice what I preach, but there are times I'm brooding around. I can't believe this person. I held him in my arms as he wept, and now he doesn't call me back. Doesn't call me back, you know. But I try to practice what I preach.
Well, I think you have your mother to thank. She told you not to judge people by what you would do, which really, I have to tell you, it stopped me. I had to stop reading your book for about a day and let that sink in, because I think that is the source of our inclination to be judgmental. And then you said, let it go, because when you really think about why you're so upset, you realize it is about your ego. Then I find out that your wife, Marin, has been listed among the top 100 psychics in America. You're living with a psychic. What's that like?
Well, it certainly keeps you on the straight and narrow. That's for sure.
Does she ever predict the outcome of your shows?
I asked her not to. I particularly did not want that for a lot of reasons. I would not want her to be wrong, but B, one of the excitements, God help me, is the fact that I want to see what happens. I don't want to know in advance. So it reminds me of a wonderful scene in Patton with George C. Scott. It's after a battle and there's carnage everywhere. And he's walking around with an aide and he says, God help me. I love this. And what he meant was even though it was horrible and it was war, he was into it. Well, in my own way, that's how I feel. I love producing. I really do, except for the raising of the money. But the actual working with the director, the writer, the casting, the publicity, the promotion, the advertising, all of it, I really enjoy doing. But I don't like the money part. So, yes, I feel the same way. So I don't want to know it ahead of time. It's all part of the game. And I certainly wouldn't want to find that my wife was incorrect, even though I must say, and no one would believe this, but I've never had her be wrong, whether it's the weather or a flight that we missed, and she said, we haven't missed it. I said, of course we missed it. We're 30 minutes late. She said, just move quickly. And we got there, and there they were going on. The plane had been delayed. I mean, I can't even begin if I tell you all the things, including 9/11, where she didn't say there's going to be a terrorist attack. What she said was, I'm having trouble sleeping. Something bad is going to happen. I said, to us? She said, no, to the world. I said, to the world? You think it's an atomic bomb? Or no, I don't, but I don't know what it is. But I know it's going to happen. And it did. So, I mean, people say, oh, sure. It doesn't matter. I'm so used to the fact that there are so many naysayers, Harvey, So my feeling is very simple. You can believe what you want to believe. I mean, here we are. We as a society told that the largest ocean in the world is the Pacific Ocean. And we're told that the moon, hundreds of thousands of miles away, affects that ocean. And everybody says, of course, they affects the ocean. It's crazy. Think how crazy that is. And yet we don't even question it. Absolutely, the moon affects the tides. Ridiculous. That we accept. But the fact that maybe there are people who know the future, who can see the future, well, women are very, very much more likely to accept that than men. Men just have a hard time with it. But I've lived with it for 31 years. It exists. She had it, and her mother really had it. So I must say, it's been quite an experience living with a psychic, yes.
As if your life wasn't exciting enough, you get to live with a psychic. That's amazing. I'm going to take you back to Frank D. Gilroy, that renowned playwright. He told you that your tombstone should read, quality was his undoing. But Julian, I have to tell you, the quality in terms of your personal integrity, your passion, your energy, your joy for life, your enthusiasm about the entertainment industry, and your ability to manifest what would seem impossible to other people is just so inspiring. It's so legendary. I don't think you realize just how iconic you are. And I'm so honored that you took the time to speak with me today.
Oh, well, all I can say, Harvey, if I ever need an attorney, I hope you'll come on by my side, because you're the kind of guy I want next to me in the courtroom.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, but I hung up that shingle a long time ago. And I tell you, I love being an interviewer. It's what I always wanted to do. I was only a lawyer and a judge to please my parents because they were so disappointed that I turned out gay. But this is what I really wanted to do. And getting to interview you is a real highlight for me because you are an interviewer that I've looked up to for so long. So thank you for everything you do. And thank you for coming on our show.
Well, I'm back to Ralph Cramden. Thank you, and I hope we meet one day. It would be nice to sit down and have a meal.
I would love that. Our guest has been producer, talk show host, educator, and author extraordinaire Julian Schlossberg, whose 2 books, Try Not to Hold It Against Me, A Producer's Life, and my first book, Part 2, are now available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. For more information about Mr. Schlossberg, please visit his official website, julianschlossbergproducer.com. And don't miss his terrific celebrity interview program, Julian Schlossberg's Movie Talk, on all audio podcast platforms and now on his very own YouTube channel, which is now showing on your screen. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producer, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli at the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my PR directors, Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.